Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Monica Smith, co-creator of Revel 11, along with Joni Parsons, who's taking a couple of days to be in the beautiful Methow Valley in northern Washington state. She's so lucky. It's so gorgeous there. I'm joined today by Chris Charbonneau, the host of the Fall of Roe podcast. Chris has been a past speaker with Revel 11, and we're grateful for our relationship with her. As many of you know, Revel 11 historically focuses on education and personal growth, and we typically don't engage in taking political stands. However, when it comes to women's rights, we are unapologetically pro-choice, and today's conversation will only focus on education from that viewpoint. Okay, back to our wonderful guest. Chris Charbonneau is a leading reproductive rights and healthcare leader and a former 40-year CEO at Planned Parenthood. A couple of the major accomplishments I wanted to mention is that Chris helped prove that it is sex discrimination for employers to fail to cover contraceptives if they cover other pharmaceuticals in employee health plans. I think that's pretty amazing. She was also the board chair of an organization she helped found to secure supplies of affordable contraceptives for Planned Parenthood affiliates, health departments, and health organizations serving low-income women. How cool is that? So welcome, Chris. Let's get this conversation started.
Very good. Thank you for having me, Monica. Very good to be with you all. We're talking at a very unusual and bizarre time in our history. I think most of us, I know I was not old enough to be all that aware of the pre-Roe timeframe. I was 13 when Roe v. Wade was decided, so I wasn't engaged in trying to make sure I kept my friends alive and the kinds of things that they did back then. But I had a good enough imagination and heard enough stories to know that that was absolutely something we did not want to repeat. And yet here we are. And I think it is a radically dangerous time for people who are concerned with rights and civil liberties and health, especially health of people who were born female, regardless of how they identify now. I think that that we're in for a really rough patch. There are a whole lot of things about this, though, that are going better than I could have planned. I spent a number of years working out strategies for what to do if such a thing happened, hoping that I would never have to pull them off any dusty shelf. Never did I expect that the anti-choice folks would reveal themselves so fully for who they are, which I think is a giant advantage for all of us who are trying to bring us back into equilibrium, because to know what they want to do is to despise what they want to do. And I think that that's a fairly universal reaction. It's not bound to people's politics. When you see people deciding that they're not going to be willing to let doctors do abortions to save a woman's life, you know, there are 5 people on the planet who think that's a good idea. So anyway, let's start with talking about sort of what the state of the underlying groundwork was, and then we can talk about how things have changed a little bit.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Yep, I'm really open to having people ask questions along the way, either in chat or get Monica's attention, and she can facilitate that for us. But wanted to start with 1973, Roe v. Wade passes through the Supreme Court. The Roe v. Wade decision came up with an opinion that split pregnancies into trimesters, the 9 months of pregnancy into 3 parts. The first trimester, they said, that is entirely up to a woman who is pregnant to decide what she wants to do. Very little regulation allowed in that, just that sort of the normal healthcare safety regulations allowed for figuring out what needed to happen, but she gets to decide what happens with that pregnancy. In the second trimester, there were more medical regulations put into place, not put into place by the decision, but made possible to be put into place. So they could regulate where it needed to happen, how it needed to happen, extra things about that. And the third trimester, it was like, now you're too late. Now you're really too late. If you are not saving your life, or it's not a viable pregnancy, so there's not a life to be considered there, then we the state are going to tell you that it's not legal. And so really the United States had honed in on abortion between, whenever the pregnancy starts and 24 weeks after your last menstrual period. So that's not 24 weeks from the time you had sex. You count like approximately 2 weeks before that. So it's actually sort of 22 weeks of actually being pregnant. That was sort of determined to be the point of viability, after which if you had a delivery, it could potentially survive that. Now, a pregnancy surviving at 24 weeks is exceptionally rare. And the reason for that is lung development. And nothing about that has changed in decades. So there's not any argument to be made, well, technology has so improved that you can save fetuses younger and younger, and therefore, some of the arguments you hear made about these weeks bans, like at 15 weeks, etc. That's not true. Babies don't survive prematurely born any younger than they did 40 years ago. And that's because there's been a hard stop at that science. There's no lung development. And so you can't breathe air. And so we breathe air on this planet, and that's what it takes. People born at 24 weeks are usually extremely impaired, and survival is not at all a given. So that's just to help you understand a little bit the framework of where we are. A decision after that, called Casey, gave states the opportunity to regulate abortion, but it could not create an undue burden for the person trying to get an abortion. And so we had years of fighting about whether an 800-mile drive was an undue burden, et cetera. Whether you could make clinics retrofit their buildings to have 4-foot hallways and that kind of thing. In 2016, right before the presidential election, the Supreme Court had its most liberal abortion decision ever. And most of us would still be talking about that had Donald Trump not been elected the month after. Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstadt said, the Supreme Court, don't give us any of this about how you're regulating abortion out of existence to protect women's health, because you'd need to prove to us that what you're talking about actually protects their health. Texans, you forcing women to go to New Mexico because you're protecting her health just doesn't pass the straight face test, and we're not having it. So what a difference one election makes. Donald Trump gets into office. He's able to replace 3 Supreme Court justices with the most extreme variety of people, giving him the 5-4 majority that he needs to overturn Roe, which was a campaign promise, and which was not a mega project, but was a project of standard Republican office holders for decades. So all of a sudden, it turns back the ability for the states to make abortion entirely illegal if they want to, which a number of them have. And some are in the process of doing that. And some aren't quite yet complete, but are going there. Where that leaves us is a patchwork of 50 state laws all over the place that are wildly different from one another. They extend from the state of Washington, which is considered a haven or a destination state for people seeking abortion. Washington, Oregon, California, the entire northern eastern side of the state, New York, Vermont, and Maine, and New Hampshire, and all of that. All those kinds of states are haven states, and they are passing laws rapidly to not only ensure that abortion is available through the entire time that it was in pre-Roe time, but that people helping people come to those states are also protected by law. There has been a very liberal sort of agreement between states that says if someone commits a crime in Alabama and that person runs to New York, New York will get that person transported back to Alabama so that they can face justice. Well, the Haven states now are all passing shield law, what I call them shield laws. No, I don't think anyone else does, but I consider them shield laws, protecting people who host a person from a state where abortion is now illegal in their home. They help make arrangements. They, pick people up at the airport. They basically are holding someone's hand through a tough life process. Washington state and California and all those states I mentioned, Connecticut, everybody have passed laws saying, yeah, that thing about we'll extradite people to your state, we're totally not doing it for this. We will not help you. We will not help you by sending our troopers over to get medical records that you want to prove that someone's done something. We won't collect evidence for you. We won't put anyone on a plane back to you. Our law is our law, and if it happens here and it meets the standards of our law, we're doing nothing to help you convict people for this. So that is a really wonderful turn of events, and I'm gratified that all that yelling we did to all those attorneys general before this ever happened was listened to, and these people were ready to go when that happened. And to make this not any stupider than it already is going to be, which is going to be extremely stupid. We see this already. Louisiana actually had a debate last week about whether if somebody had an abortion, they could execute the woman right off, or if maybe the abortion wasn't complete, they'd have to wait until she had delivered to execute her because they're pro-life. So anyway, I never anticipated the degree to which they would let their extreme show, and they are really letting their extreme show. Tonight, we're going to see something right away to tell us what situation we're in. We have a primary in the state of Kansas, and in the primary ballot, they are allowing Kansans to vote on whether or not people in Kansas want to subvert their constitution, which allows for abortion rights, and give the right back to the legislature to make anti-abortion law, is basically the shorthand of how that's going to work. So the anti-choice people will all be voting yes. The pro-choice people will be voting no. And we will see within a day or two, if Kansas takes a while to count that vote, where that's landing. I think that the overturning of Roe has been fairly galvanizing. We'd seen for a long time in polls, people don't vote on this issue as at a very high priority. But now that it's real and they're not protected by Roe anymore, and people can do more than talk, this has really risen to the top of people's concerns. So people, yes, worried about inflation, prices and whatnot, and also abortion rights and also democracy. So that's really starting to bubble up, and we're going to see how much energy there is for this kind of thing. Weirdly, in a primary. So I would just say if we see results like they have just turned this over to the Kansas legislature to do their worst, I don't know that means there are not a lot of pro-choice people in Kansas. It could just mean that primary voters are few and far between, and they tend to be of the more extreme variety in either of the parties. So Monica, I wanted to stop for a second and ask if there are questions that are beginning to emerge, or you want me to continue to lay this out.
Well, there are not questions in the chat area yet.
Okay.
Starting to emerge, but I know my blood pressure is going up right now. Like pretty anxious and hopeless.
Yep.
And I'm guessing other people are feeling the same way. And so, of course, I want to just like jump straight to, well, what can we do about it? Especially like, like you're talking about Kansas.
Yeah.
And we're probably all entirely helpless because we can't weigh in on Kansas unless you have suggestions.
Right.
So how do you respond to that?
Well, I would say, first of all, this is not hopeless. This is a little bit the dark before the dawn. And so I think it's important for everybody to think for a good moment about healthcare, your own health, self-care. I think deep breathing is good. I think there are a number of very positive strategies we could use to get ourselves to the other side of this. The other thing you all need to know is the polling on this is entirely in the pro-choice direction. Even people who consider themselves anti-abortion would never in a million years think of having an abortion themselves, think this is extreme. They don't want to actually decide these things for their neighbors. They don't feel like they're in other people's shoes and can do that. And so it was one thing when you weren't actually killing people with your votes. And now that you possibly are, people really don't want to do it. And they don't find any of this a matter for rejoicing. This feels like a really unforced error to a lot of people. And there are a good many things we can do. So Kansas has been well prepared for this. It's unlikely that the people who are voting in Kansas don't know what's at stake and haven't heard about it. The question is, are we going to get a lot of the younger people who are going to be the most affected by this out to vote in their own best interests and take a stand about this kind of thing? But we have a whole bunch of other elections coming up. Every election in every state now is absolutely critical. We can no longer afford to vote for anti-choice people for anything because it matters how they vote now. And there really is damage that they can do. One more depressing thing before we get into all the hopeful possible stuff, just because we need to know this, is it doesn't matter if your state, and all the people on here except Texas currently have pro-choice leanings. North Carolina has an interesting history. They have done some incredible things like paying for abortion through their own abortion fund for years. And yet it sort of matters on the day who the legislature is. And I think right now that's not great. But we're finding many state constitutions stop the worst things. The thing about it is, though, if there were to be 2 more Republican senators, or we lose the House and in 2024 the presidency, there could be a nationwide anti-abortion ban passed. Mitch McConnell would scuttle the filibuster in 12 seconds. He would jam something through with 50% plus 1 senator, 51 people. And if the White House belonged to the Republicans, it would be the vice president's deciding vote if necessary. And they would make abortion illegal in all 50 states. The law that would pertain, if you passed a nationwide law, would override Washington and California and all of that, and it would be a disaster.
Okay, Chris, I'm just going to interrupt because I don't think a lot of people really understand the ramifications. So can you just repeat the high level of that?
Yes.
2 more Republicans go on.
Win Senate seats. Like if there were to be 51 Republican senators instead of the 48 they have now, and the House flipped, which there's a lot of fear that it will in this upcoming November election, and we didn't have a president whose veto could stop this. So we didn't have a Democrat in, because any Republican would do this. All of the pro-choice laws in all of the pro-choice states would get overridden by a nationwide abortion ban.
Okay, so even states like Washington would not be on
Washington,
legal
California,
footing.
they wouldn't be legal to do what they do. Now, what would ensue after that would be interesting, because we have a whole lot of states right now with legal marijuana, and it's illegal on a national level. But the anti-choice people are a lot stronger in their organization than the anti-weed people. And so, you know, no one's come after anybody for the other thing, but they would come after states for this.
So I am curious about, do abortion restrictions result in fewer abortions happening?
No, they just result in a lot of danger to people because they get abortions through without consulting qualified medical providers. Now, it is not completely unsafe to do your own abortion anymore because people do it with medications. And that means if you're not inserting anything into your body, you're unlikely to perforate yourself, which is the way people die from abortions, perforating yourself and then the subsequent infection.
So can we talk more about the pill, and are there things that, so people in the audience really want us to focus on what we can do?
All right.
And so like, I know that there were rumors going around about, you know, people like myself trying to collect the abortion pill, to then distribute it to people who might need it, or to organizations who will provide abortion services.
You bet.
Is that viable?
Yes. Yes, I think it's a lot more practical to get pills to people who need them to terminate pregnancies than it is to move 350, 400,000 people across state lines. I mean, obviously some of that would happen, but it tends to happen with people who have a lot of mobility anyway. So who's this going to affect? Rich women have never had any trouble. Rich women get on airplanes and go where they need to go, even if it's completely out of the country. People with any kind of support system might also be in that situation. The people who are most likely to be in the worst situations are the poorest people, people of color because of existing healthcare disparities that aren't made better by this, people with documentation problems, like you aren't legally in the country to begin with. Leaving the country is a dangerous and dicey thing. You may not get back to your family. And people start to take more and more risk based on where they are in weighing that out. Anyone who's alone is in worse condition than anyone that has any kind of support system around them. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to be the support system around them. If you're a pro-choice person, you should tell everybody you know that you're a pro-choice person and can be relied upon in some situation to try to be helpful. There are a lot of people going on the website Planned to secure a secure supply. And by that, I mean the stuff is actually what they say it is, and it works the way it's supposed to. Secure supply of the drugs that you need. It's a 2-drug regimen combo. And you take one, and then 4 hours later, you take the other. And the first basically stops the cell growth, and the second basically evacuates the uterus.
But how can we help with Plan C?
You can buy Plan C. It is legal to do that. You don't even need to be female to do that. You don't need to be of reproductive age to do that. You can buy Plan C and have a dose in your cabinet. Would last you for a couple of years. If you run into anyone in that time that needs it, you could drop it into the mail. The U.S. Postal Service is owned by the federal government. It is not illegal to mail something to someone, even if it's illegal in that state. So at that point, you have done everything legal. Self-abortion is also not illegal in most states. So the person getting it in the mail who swallows it is also not guilty of anything. Up until this point, most of the anti-choice laws have focused on punishing the doctors and the people who help people, not the people who actually have the abortion. It was sort of the woman as victim kind of gestalt that they were working on. We have to keep in mind, though, these laws are changing by the hour now, that some of the states are bringing people into special session, et cetera, to make laws. Idaho's in the middle of this. You know, I don't know how much they're on to that they don't have illegal abortion, but for our Texas person, you might remember that story of the young woman who got some mifepristone, methotrexate, that's the combo drugs, probably from Mexico. She took them, had an abortion, then apparently went to a hospital, I think for reassurance. The hospital turned her in for self-abortion. And they publicized her name all over the place, which I found mortifying. And then everybody realized it's not illegal to self-abort in Texas. They don't have a law against women aborting themselves. And so there was nobody to blame for anything. And all they had done was create the HIPAA violation of the century. And so I have been advocating that the federal government go after that hospital tooth and tongs to charge them with a privacy violation, HIPAA violation, because HIPAA is about what medical people can convey to the world about your healthcare.
Yeah, Chris,
And so,
there are questions from the audience that I want to get to, but
good.
before I do that, help us understand if, okay, so say each one of us order a pill.
Yep.
First of all, how do we do that? So I would love to put together a list of resources that we send out after this to all of these participants.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a place that we can mail those if we don't know anyone who, say, becomes pregnant? Is there an organization that we can mail those pills to who will distribute it safely?
Not yet.
Okay.
There is an organization called Honeybee Health that is a pharmacy in California that is putting out as much resource as they can. So one thing you might consider doing, if that's your situation, as opposed to you think you might know someone who might need these, is for you to contact Honeybee Health and figure out if a donation to them so that they could buy what they need to do their business would help. She is a mission-oriented pharmacist that's decided to do this.
Okay, so we will send out that resource information
right
at the end of this call.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
If you have young people who are thinking that they need an abortion, Abortionfinder.org is a site that is coordinated by all the Planned Parenthoods and the independent providers, everybody, so that we have as many people who are as willing to participate as possible on that. And always good for somebody in each state to call those people. They are also safe people to call and ask questions. They are not going to turn you in somewhere for wanting to know something, and they're not going to turn over any kind of call logs to anyone trying to prosecute you for anything. So it's a way to get information out there to keep people safe. Job one for all of us in this is to make sure that some desperate person doesn't do something that will maim or kill them in the meantime, while we try to get this crazy under control.
There was also a link in the chat session for Women Donors Network, if you have the capacity to give.
Yes. Women Donors Network has been pulling this together. Also, giving to the abortion funds around the country. If you Google abortion funds for your state, usually what comes up is the either coalition or the organization that manages abortion funds. You put your money in there, they hook it up with the women or the providers that are going to care for them. And it helps make sure that people get what they need. If your strategy is, I want to pay for somebody to get something they need today, that's a good way to do it. There are a whole lot of sort of other infrastructure investments that can also be made. And one of my first products in my new think tank, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end, is a philanthropist's guide to giving through this. So people who want to know how to direct their money, this document is divided up by what your goals are. Like, do you want a short-term thing? You want to help somebody today, or do you want to create systemic change, et cetera? Do you want to pay for legal defenses, that kind of thing?
That's great.
Anyway, that'll be free to everybody, and hopefully it'll just help us all figure out how we want to position ourselves in this
That's
in this new
terrific.
landscape. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the questions, what is the path of least resistance, parentheses, the quickest, most efficient path to restoring our rights? Federal law question, packing the court. What are the lead measures, example, holding the House, required to execute the path of least resistance to restoring reproductive freedom?
Mm-hmm. Well, just like they can't afford to get 2 more people in the Senate, you know, that would help them overturn. If we had a couple of more, and they were willing to put a parentheses around the filibuster for this, we would pass a nationwide law that would restore abortion to all of the states that have lost it now. So that would actually be the easiest thing to do. We are all lining up to vote in a primary here in November, and people coming out to say, we're not having this, is incredibly important. I mean, there are pitched battles going on now in states like Kentucky and things like that, where the only thing that is making it illegal are varying judicial decisions that are coming out on either side of this. Those clinics have been open and shut 3 times in the last bit of time. And so this isn't hard and fast anywhere. You know, I mean, Texans have a chance to really change up and send a signal to their current governor. And, you know, there are a lot of things that can be done both on in states that are movable, and at the federal level. So that would absolutely be a thing. I almost cried when I heard that Joe Biden was unwilling to pack the court. That obviously would be not a short-term strategy because it takes a while to affect something like that. But I mean, it's clearly, the court's clearly been gamed. You know, I mean, we all watched what happened when Merrick Garland couldn't even get a hearing. Then they had one that one could argue was a legitimate appointment. And then, you know, using the exact opposite argument that they used for the Garland thing, that they appointed Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement, you know, a week after she died. And so it, you know, it clearly wasn't according to Hoyle how that all went down. And there are obviously, as a result, a lot of questions about the legitimacy of the court.
Do you foresee, this is a question from Wendy, do you foresee the morning after pill or Plan C being banned in the future, meaning self-abortion being illegal?
So, okay, let's be careful about our terminology here.
Okay.
Those are 2 different things. Plan C is an abortion. That happens weeks after sex. The morning after pill is not an abortifacient. The way the morning after pill works is it prevents ovulation if you have not already released an egg. So what happens is there's no egg, therefore there's no pregnancy. That happens the morning after a condom breaks. And so we need to all be clear, because the antis are trying to muddy up the water on this. They're trying to say things like IUDs or morning after pills are actually really, 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 really super, super early abortions, and therefore should also be able to be made illegal. The Plan C, so Plan B is the morning after pill. Plan C is, we know she's pregnant. We can diagnose it. We can see it on a pregnancy test. And it involves 2 drugs that are very different in their action. There is an implanted pregnancy, and we are unimplanting that off a uterine wall, and we're evacuating that out of a uterus. Do I see them, though, to the heart of the question, going after birth control? Yes, I do. You know, Gloria Steinem, when I was 18, was speaking at something, and she said, the object of all of this is control of women. You can't control women just by making abortion illegal, although they will. You can only control women if they also don't have access to contraception. And I thought to myself, as an 18-year-old in 1978, like, who in the world with a straight face is going to make contraception illegal now? Well, what they're going to do is argue that contraception really is the same as abortion. And therefore, all the things you believe about abortion, because we've convinced you of that, we're also going to convince you of in contraception. Now, I think that's far-fetched, given that we've all used all that stuff for decades and we all have our own feelings about it. None of us consider ourselves, to have had thousands of abortions because we were on oral contraceptives for 30 years or whatever. But they're going to try it. And in the opinion that Clarence Thomas wrote in his own opinion off to the side, he said, and the reasoning we use to overturn Roe could also be used to overturn Griswold v. Connecticut. And Griswold v. Connecticut is the decision that makes contraception constitutionally protected. So he basically said, "Hey, send it up. We'll get 5, to vote for that." So what alarms me more is not that states are going to try to do it and have that upheld right away, because I think that any court looking at a suit like that, and there would be suits, would strike it down for the moment. It's that they're going to try to meld these things together in the minds of people who are anti-choice or who don't know. And they are going to try to make birth control and abortion, that's all the same. It's kind of this muddy water. And our society cannot function without women able to contracept. In my career at Planned Parenthood over the 40 years, there were a few things that really made a huge difference in women's lives. This was before my career, but obviously one was the invention of oral contraceptives. After that, morning after treatment really decreased the number of unintended pregnancies. After that, it was the second generation IUDs like the Mirenas and those highly effective IUDs that came into being. And you could just see, we went from nearly 1.8 million unintended pregnancies a year in the United States to 1.4 to 800,000 now, as a result of people using highly effective contraceptive methods that they don't have to take every day, that are just incredible. And those basically have changed life for women and made the number of abortions that we're actually talking about relatively small. When you're looking at this number of states that you're dealing with, I counted them up. The unintended pregnancies in the states where abortion is illegal or hard to get today are between 350 and 400,000. And so that's the number of people we're talking about helping here in the short term. If you were to go after contraception, we would see that number balloon back up to those kinds of rates that we had earlier in my life in this movement. And that would be tragic. Very few people who have abortions don't already have children. And you're talking about people who are trying to feed their own kids. And so how do you keep people able to live their lives and keep things in equilibrium is by giving people healthcare that helps them and doesn't hurt them.
Chris, is there a resource like Planned Parenthood that we could learn about our state's candidates that support or are against? Like, who
Yes.
do we go to at a state level for knowing who to support in elections?
In each state, the local Planned Parenthoods and other progressive groups as well all have voter guides. NARAL, Pro-Choice America, has voter guides, and they ask people distinctly about all the things related to these issues, not just abortion, but sex education, willingness to buy into that. Because keep in mind, that's the future. If you can tell people how to avoid these problems, then you never get there. Obviously, what their policies around contraception are in terms of payment for low-income people and access to those important and really effective methods. All of those issues could not be more vital than they are today. If you're going to make it tough for people to back up their contraceptive failures with abortion care, then you're going to have to make contraception a whole lot more available.
I'd like to explore birth control a little bit more and access to affordable. What's the current situation with access to affordable or free birth control?
Well, one of the cool things that happened after we succeeded in our lawsuit, Erickson v. Bartell, that made it sex discrimination to not cover contraception in insurance plans. That meant when the Affordable Care Act was passed, contraception was in the Affordable Care Act. So anyone who is covered by any of the ACA plans has coverage for contraception. And if you know people who have those plans and they're saying they're denying me, be the helpful, older sister or auntie or whoever you are, and call that insurance company and tell them that they're not within their rights to do it, and complain to your insurance commissioner, because those people by law are all required to be offering contraception in those plans today. Now, they may not offer every single kind of pill and every single kind of device, but they have to offer one of each kind in a class. So they may only have one IUD that they're covering, but they have to cover an IUD. And so that made a huge difference. All these states know that they can be sued now, and then the employers, more importantly, the employers in the states know that they can be sued if they don't do this. So that really helped. Medicaid across, Medicaid, which is the federal health care plan for low income people, also covers contraception in every state. It's a requirement for every state that they do that. So the people who are really hanging out are the undocumented, or people in that hole that they make too much money to get onto an ACA plan that they can afford, but they're not employed at an employer, because almost all of the employer plans cover this now, or they have gotten sued for not covering it. And so when you hear about things like Hobby Lobby not wanting to add birth control into their plan, that's the thing they're arguing about. They don't want to be forced to offer coverage for something they don't believe in. And because covering contraception is so much less expensive than not covering contraception for all the people paying bills down the road, states have been known to hop in and make sure that that coverage happens, because they don't want to pay for unintended pregnancy on the other end. You all need to know that almost 50% of all unintended pregnancies are then paid for by the state taxpayers of each state. And so we're talking about a massive transfer of cash that would happen if you were forcing a lot of people to remain pregnant.
That just doesn't make any sense. Okay, so if we wanted a list of some of those organizations like Hobby Lobby that is lobbying for this, and should we be using our pocketbooks to influence this? And is there a resource that lists those companies?
There are many online resources that list those companies. The good news is Little Sisters of the Poor, the case that went up to the Supreme Court that said, well, we're a group of nuns, we shouldn't have to cover contraception because it's not our thing. They actually won that case, and we were sort of watching to see how many employers really jumped on that bandwagon. Like they were literally going to go to some authority and tell them they were refusing to cover birth control. It turned out to be a handful. This is really a very extreme position, and most companies don't want to be that unpopular with their employees. And so, you don't have a ton, but you do have like the Chick-fil-A's and the Hobby Lobby types and other people who not only have those positions, but, are openly anti-LGBTQ, have a number of other positions that sort of go along with this that are unpopular, and those can be gotten off the internet.
Okay, so, a lot of this focus and a lot of the questions from the audience are related to what can we do?
Yes.
And so I'm hearing number one, with our voting.
Yes.
Number two, with our pocketbook.
Yes.
In a very various ways, either contributing to these organizations or not purchasing from some of these companies. And then help us with some of the other, do rallies work? Does it improve our chances? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, rallies are a giant show of public support, but we had 4 million people out on the streets for for the March for Women's Lives right after Donald Trump got elected. I mean, there were huge protests, and here we are. I mean, I'm also, so I'm not personally a fan of taking it to the streets, except for this. I think it does our hearts good to see how big our community is. But you never see the Koch brothers marching for their rights, like, because they don't need it. And so I kind of consider marches and rallies like the politics of the oppressed. They take a tremendous amount of effort to put together. And I'd rather we were stealthy and sneaky and underhanded, et cetera, and got things done around the edge without using all of everybody's energy like that. I mean, if we rally, then we have to promise ourselves we're not only going to rally, but we're going to rally and vote. We're going to rally and fundraise. Yeah. Going to the rally is not the thing. That is the product. It is a way to give ourselves energy to go on. And if it does that, then rally away.
Okay, we're starting to run out of time. So have we covered all of kind of the buckets of what we can do ourselves?
I think, so it's tell everybody that you're a resource. Educate yourself in order to be a resource. There's voting, which is non-negotiable. Everyone has to do it. There is figuring out an investment strategy in what you're going to do about this. But I think we have to talk about it a lot more. I mean, we are the majority, the vast majority, and people have to stop electing people who do not represent them. And we have to make those people who represent us know that we're watching and that we're not okay with this. In Idaho, for example, because a lot of people in northern Idaho get their news in Spokane, a lot of people in southern Idaho get their news from the Utah market and Nevada markets. People don't know what's going on in Idaho, and they don't know how bad their legislature is. And we have countless legislatures right now just meeting to figure out if they, in the race to the bottom, how much more extreme they can make their own laws. And so it's incredibly important that not be where this ends. And so we need to start affecting the change back the other way, and we need to make our disapproval felt, and we need to be writing columns to the newspaper or writing on the online commentary about things. And we need to out by name the people who are creating a situation for people where they could die. This isn't only about women with unplanned pregnancies. This is about people with planned pregnancies. My colleagues from Texas tell me that if you have a planned pregnancy and you go in with bleeding now because you've got a threatened spontaneous abortion, or you have any kind of complication, doctors are standing around outside your room while you're bleeding in there, debating their legal risk. This is so stupid in terms of people's actual health and everyone doing the right thing for their patients, that it's unreal. And it's not going to be very long before we start getting a death toll for people who had planned pregnancies that went terribly awry, and then they didn't get the care they needed. And so it doesn't only impact someone else. This is literally every one of us somehow, whether it's our loved ones, maybe in this situation or whatever. If you can't afford to be safely pregnant, which is already, to be clear, been a thing for a long time for people of color and some things like that, then you don't live in a safe space, and nobody around you should feel safe either.
It was really well said by Hannah in the audience. She said, one thing the women in my life and I have been talking about is the silence of those who are pro-choice, but don't speak out about it. What value do you place on being vocal online about your stance on this topic? And I feel that so much, Hannah. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely, Hannah. Could not say it better.
Yeah, especially, I mean, I live in Idaho, and it is definitely a sensitive topic, and I don't know how to handle it in all situations. So I appreciate you saying that. But it does sound, Chris, like your answer is yes, we need to be vocal.
Absolutely vocal, and especially those of us, who lead a certain privilege in our lives. We are leaders in many ways in our various communities and many things. And it's like, I don't care what your religious stuff is. That doesn't need to concern me. We are not a country that establishes a religion is how we're going to do things. And so I care about what the outcomes are for my neighbors and my young cousins and my nieces. This is dangerous. And even the most hardened anti-choice person now knows that they have created a situation that is dangerous. Mm-hmm. It can affect them, even if they never in a million years would choose to have an abortion.
And it might be, I mean, maybe that is one of the inroads, is to find that common ground that we can all agree on. And I think women's health is probably one of those.
Yeah, you have to be exceptionally extreme to say we shouldn't be able to save women's lives. And if anyone dared say that in public, they're the ones that hold the unpopular position, not you.
Yeah. There was a question. I know that this is just a tough answer. I don't even know if it's possible, but how long or how many years do you think it will take to restore reproductive freedom?
I think the longer project of this is probably the work of at least a decade. The shorter thing is that I think if this November we put money into those races that can be flipped, and unfortunately this has become a party issue. It's literally Democrats, Republicans. If we could make sure that Democrats won these elections, we could pass a nationwide pro-choice law. All the clinics would open again, and we could continue this fight on a different level. And so I think that that's job one. We need to pay super attention. We need to all be single issue voters, although it isn't a single issue, as you can see, it is 13 issues. We need to vote on whether we are actually humans with souls. And I would maintain that we are, and there are huge number of men who aren't in this situation necessarily every day, who also think we are, and get with our allies and just sort of say, we're the United States of America. This isn't who we are. We're not going to put up with this. And so doing that could make short work of this phase, and then make them try to get the legislature back. But we have 2 Democrats at this point who aren't going to undo the filibuster for things. And if we get 2 more in there, we can do that, carve out for this, make a nationwide pro-choice law and work on this, and then have the skirmish in a million other ways. But at least day to day, we'd have people getting care again.
Yeah. Chris, before we wrap up, we would love to hear about what's next for Chris. And I know that you mentioned the think tank when we were online at the beginning. So can you just talk a little bit about what's next for you?
Absolutely. Well, I run a podcast called the Fall of Roe podcast. That's just sort of my project to sort of be able to put information out there, but have begun a think tank that's called Repro Hub, to try to noodle our way through all these different scenarios and situations, and figure out smart things to tell attorneys general to do that are willing to do them, and people like you that are willing to listen, and help people continue to support the things that are important to support in the meantime while we watch the dust settle. And ultimately, my goal is to create a series of laws. Like if you were to create the best state law situation for women in the nation, which laws would those include? Sample legislation, like the other side has done for a long time. They have these think tanks where they come up with all the things they want to change. We need to put out there what utopia would be for women in law. And we need to tell everybody that we expect that that is what they're going to vote on, because we need to look past this problem, which is, yes, ours to fix right now, but to say, and we want to land the boat over there on that side of the river. Because we need to tell people what it would be like. What would it be like if we actually processed rape kits, and we prosecuted rapists, and we took care of domestic violence, and we made sure Indigenous women didn't disappear without anything happening, and people could handle their pregnancies and their health care as they needed to, and there'd be equality in pay, and all of the kinds of things we all know are so important for our our daily lives and existence. We need to call out what we want those to be, and we need to give people examples of what to pass and put them in front of their faces and say, you want to be, you blue states, you want to be good to women, you make this happen, and then make sure the others follow you.
Well, I can't wait to follow you in that effort and support you. And I'm sure everyone on this call feels the same way. So Chris, thank you so much for this information. It's been really informative and helpful. And everyone, we will consolidate all of these resources and send them out. Chris and I will work on that today. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for taking this time out of your early morning to talk about something so depressing. I hope you all understand there is a light at the other end of this, but we all need to just link arms and get there together.
Yep, that's true. Thank you. We do have some upcoming events, and I'm not going to go through them right now because we've run out of time. But as you guys know, you can go to revel11.com to check out our upcoming events and retreats. There's some really fun ones coming up. So everyone have a great day. Chris, thank you again. And let's get going on this, guys. Okay. See you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you all. See you.